The Galactic Council chamber looked different than it had 3 months earlier when the Vraxin Collective had announced their intention to subjugate Earth. The crystalline walls now displayed real-time feeds from Sol System showing Vraxin ships departing at maximum speed while human vessels maintained careful observation positions. Elder Counselor Thane called the session to order, and the assembled delegates from 47 star systems focused their attention on the 3 humans standing. At the center of the chamber, General Sarah Martinez represented Earth's conventional military forces. Ambassador James Chun represented Earth's unified diplomatic coalition, and standing slightly apart in a simple black uniform with no visible rank insignia was a woman who introduced herself only as Commander Williams from Joint Special Operations Command. The Galactic Council formally recognizes Earth's sovereign claim to the Sol System, Thane announced, and extends an invitation for humanity to join the Council as full members with all rights and protections afforded to spacefaring civilizations. Ambassador Chun stepped forward and spoke with the diplomatic precision of someone who understood they were making history. Earth accepts the Council's recognition, and we look forward to peaceful cooperation with all species represented here. He said, however, we must address the circumstances that brought us to this point. He gestured, and holographic displays activated showing footage from the Vraxin invasion. For weeks, we fought a defensive war against an occupying force that possessed superior technology and numerical advantage. Chun continued, our conventional military performed admirably and held strategic positions and inflicted casualties that forced the enemy to reconsider their invasion, but the turning point came when our special operations forces demonstrated that technology alone does not determine victory. The displays shifted to show footage that had been captured during various special operations missions. Navy SEALs emerging from ocean depths to destroy coastal installations. Delta Force operators infiltrating enemy command ships. SAS teams coordinating resistance networks across occupied territories. Spetsnaz soldiers operating in conditions that would kill most species. These warriors represent something unique to humanity. Chun said, they are volunteers who chose to push themselves beyond normal limits, and they trained for years to become capable of operating in any environment against any enemy, and they succeeded not because of superior equipment but because of superior training and creativity and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Delegate from the Silicon Communes transmitted a question through the chamber's communication system. We understand that these special operators were effective against the Vraxin, the delegate said, but surely this was an exceptional circumstance and not representative of normal human capability. Commander Williams stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had operated in places the Council could barely imagine. With respect, Counselor, you are incorrect, she said. Every operator who fought in this war started as an ordinary human, and they volunteered for selection courses that have failure rates exceeding 80%, and those who pass spend years in training. That broke their bodies and rebuilt them stronger and taught them skills that most people believe are impossible. She activated her own display showing footage from various Special Operations Selection courses. This is the U.S. Navy SEAL Basic Underwater Demolition Course. Williams explained as the display showed humans enduring physical trials that made several delegates recoil in discomfort. Candidates spend 6 months in training. It includes swimming in near-freezing water and operating without sleep for days and carrying boats on their heads through sand, and those who quit are not punished or shamed because the course exists to find those who will not quit under any circumstances. The footage shifted to show other selection programs. British SAS candidates navigating mountain terrain in winter with minimal equipment. Russian Spetsnaz trainees conducting combat exercises in conditions that range from Arctic cold to desert heat. Chinese snow leopard commandos learning to operate at altitudes that would incapacitate unacclimatized individuals. Israeli commandos training in maritime operations that required them to remain underwater for periods that seemed physiologically impossible. Every special operations force represented in our military has their own selection and training pipeline. Williams continued, and while the specific requirements vary, the underlying principle is the same. Find ordinary people who possess extraordinary determination and give them the skills to accomplish missions that conventional forces cannot. General Martinez added her perspective. The Council was right to fear our conventional military. She said, Earth maintains standing armies numbering in the millions, and we have nuclear arsenals and industrial capacity that can produce weapons at scales most species consider excessive. But our special operations forces represent something different, and they are force multipliers who can achieve strategic effects with minimal personnel. She displayed tactical analysis from the Vraxin War. A single SEAL team destroyed a supply depot that was feeding the entire California occupation force. Martinez said, a Delta Force squadron infiltrated the enemy flagship and stole intelligence that changed our strategic understanding, and an SAS troop coordinated resistance operations across an entire continent, and these are not exceptional cases but rather representative of what these operators accomplish on a regular basis. Ambassador Crow of the Peaceful Synthesis spoke with colors that indicated genuine curiosity mixed with concern. You speak of these warriors with pride, she observed. Yet they are instruments of violence, and surely humanity's path to joining the galactic community should involve moving beyond such capabilities. Commander Williams smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. With respect, Ambassador, that perspective comes from a species that has not faced an existential threat in recorded history, she said. Humanity has spent our entire existence fighting for survival against predators and disease, and each other, and we learned that peace is not a natural state, but something that must be protected by those willing to face violence on behalf of those who cannot. She paused, and her expression softened slightly. Our special operations forces exist not because we love war, but because we understand that some threats cannot be negotiated with or reasoned with. Williams continued, they exist because when diplomacy fails and when conventional options are exhausted, someone needs to be capable of doing what is necessary to protect innocent lives. Dane interjected with a question that many delegates were thinking. Do you believe that every species should develop similar capabilities? He asked. Ambassador Chan answered carefully. We believe every species should have the right to defend themselves in whatever manner suits their culture and capabilities. He said, for humanity, special operations forces make sense because we are adaptable and creative, and we have cultural traditions of individual initiative within disciplined structures. But other species might develop different solutions to similar problems. The Hive Commune's delegates spoke in their characteristic unified voice. We have analyzed the footage from your operations against the Vraxin, they said, and we are troubled by what we observed because your operators frequently operated independently and made tactical decisions without consulting command authority, and this suggests a dangerous lack of centralized control. General Martinez nodded in understanding. That independence is intentional, she explained. Special operations missions often occur in environments where communication with higher command is impossible or compromised, and our operators are trained to understand the strategic intent of their missions and then given the authority to achieve that intent using their own judgment. She displayed mission footage from the JSOC-17 infiltration of the Vraxin War Council. This operation required the team to make dozens of critical decisions in real time. Martinez said, they encountered security measures that were not in the intelligence briefing, and they adapted their approach and they completed the mission because we trusted them to think creatively rather than simply follow a predetermined plan. Commander Williams added a critical point, that independence comes with corresponding accountability. She said, "Our operators are trained in the laws of war and rules of engagement and expected to make ethical decisions under extreme pressure. And those who violate these standards face consequences regardless of mission success." The chamber fell silent as delegates processed this information. Finally, a delegate from a species that had maintained strict neutrality spoke. "We have heard your explanations and we have reviewed the evidence," they said, "and we must acknowledge that humanity has demonstrated capabilities that exceed our previous understanding. But this raises an obvious question. What prevents these special operations forces from being used for aggression rather than defense?" Ambassador Chun had clearly anticipated this question, the same thing that has prevented humanity from destroying itself despite possessing nuclear weapons for over 80 years. He said, "We have cultural and legal frameworks that constrain the use of military force, and we have civilian oversight of military operations, and we have international laws that govern." Commander Zethus requested reinforcements from the Vraxen Collective's home fleets and transmitted detailed reports about the asymmetric warfare tactics that were destroying his invasion force. The response came after 3 days of analysis by the Collective's Strategic Command. Adapt to their methods. The orders read, deploy small patrol units and establish ambush positions and use their own guerrilla tactics against them. Zethus implemented the new strategy immediately. Vraxen forces reorganized into hunter-killer teams that operated independently, with enhanced sensor packages and authorization to pursue targets without waiting for command approval. The results were catastrophic. The first Vraxen hunter team disappeared in the jungles of South America, where they had been tracking what sensors indicated was a small group of human operators. A search party found their bodies 3 days later and arranged in a pattern that forensic analysis suggested was meant to send a message. Vraxen's advanced armor had been removed and their weapons were gone, and each soldier had been killed with precise strikes that indicated intimate knowledge of Vraxen anatomy. A Brazilian Special Forces operator had left his unit's insignia on the squad leader's body. The second team vanished in the urban ruins of Detroit, where American and Canadian JTF-2 operators had turned the abandoned city into a maze of carefully planned kill zones. Vraxen walked into an ambush that used the buildings themselves as weapons-shaped charges brought down structures in sequence and channeled the alien patrol into a confined space where conventional explosives finished them by the time reinforcements arrived. The Special Operations Team had vanished into tunnels that connected to the city's old automotive factory network. The third team made it back to base, but reported something that made Zethus's combat glands flood with alarm chemicals. "They are inside our command structure," the surviving team leader said, his voice shaking with what the translation matrix rendered as fear. "We received orders from our battalion commander to investigate a specific location, and when we arrived, we found evidence the orders were faked and the location was an ambush site, and someone is mimicking our communication protocols." The intelligence officer ran diagnostics and discovered that 17 separate communications over the past week had been sent from sources that appeared to be legitimate Vraxen command channels, but were actually sophisticated intrusions. "They have penetrated our network," the officer reported, "and they are using our own communication systems to feed us false intelligence and misdirect our forces and coordinate attacks." Zethus felt something he had never experienced in 12 campaigns. The cold certainty that he was losing, but what finally broke the Vraxen will to continue the occupation came not from a military operation, but from an intelligence coup that demonstrated just how thoroughly humanity's special operations forces had infiltrated Alien Command structures. A Joint Task Force designated JSOC-17 had been planning an operation for 3 weeks. The team consisted of operators from Devigru, Delta Force, SAS, an Australian SASR working in coordination with CIA and MI6 intelligence officers. Their target was a Vraxan War Council meeting scheduled to take place on the command carrier Resolute Fang in high orbit. The meeting would include every senior Vraxan commander in the Sol system and strategic planners from the home fleet and security would be absolute, or so the Vraxan believed. Lieutenant Sarah Kim from DevGru studied the infiltration plan one more time and reviewed her role in what military historians would later call the most audacious special operations mission ever conducted. "We have one shot at this," she said to her team during the final briefing. "The timing has to be perfect, and if any element fails, we abort and extract." The plan relied on intelligence gathered from dozens of previous raids and interrogations of captured Vraxan soldiers, and analysis of stolen communication protocols. It required the team to insert via captured alien shuttle that had been modified to broadcast authentic Vraxan identification codes. It required them to operate in zero gravity, wearing modified spacesuits that could defeat Vraxan sensors, and it required them to successfully infiltrate a warship with a crew of 3,000, while planting surveillance devices that would broadcast the entire War Council meeting across every communication frequency. The Galactic Council monitored. The operation began at 0300 hours when the shuttle launched from a hidden facility in the asteroid belt. The pilot was a former Air Force officer who had spent 6 months learning to fly Vraxan craft using stolen training simulations. The shuttle approached Resolute Fang using approach vectors copied from legitimate supply runs and transmitted access codes that had been valid 12 hours earlier. Vraxan security cleared them for docking. The team moved through the ship's corridors and captured armor and carrying forged identification that would pass casual inspection but would fail under detailed scrutiny. They had 4 hours before the War Council convened. 2 hours to reach the council chamber. 2 hours to plant the devices and get back to the shuttle. Captain James Rodriguez from Delta Force led the team through maintenance corridors that the Vraxan crew rarely used there. Intelligence indicated that these passages were monitored by automated systems rather than active patrols. The automated systems had been compromised 2 weeks earlier by a cyber warfare team that had introduced subtle errors in their threat recognition, algorithms errors that made the systems ignore certain sensor signatures that matched the modified human equipment. The team reached the council chamber with 30 minutes to spare. Sergeant David O'Connor from SAS placed surveillance devices so small they were nearly invisible and positioned them to capture audio and video from every angle. The devices were powered by ambient electromagnetic radiation from the ship itself and would broadcast on frequencies the Vraxan did not monitor because they assumed no one could access their secure vessel. The team extracted through the same route they had used to infiltrate and reached their shuttle with 10 minutes before the War Council began. As they departed the Resolute Fang, Sarah Kim activated the broadcast sequence across the galaxy. Every species that maintained monitoring stations in the Sol system received a transmission on Galactic Council emergency frequencies. The transmission showed the Vraxan War Council in perfect detail. Commander Zethis stood at the head of a conference table that displayed tactical maps of Earth. "The subjugation is proceeding according to revised parameters," he was saying to the assembled commanders. "Civilian casualties are acceptable losses, and we are authorized to use orbital bombardment against population centers that resist integration." Another commander gestured to a holographic display showing human cities. "We have identified cultural sites of significance to the humans," he said. "Targeting these locations will break their psychological resistance and historical records. Suggest humans value their cultural heritage more than strategic assets." The council discussed using biological weapons and mass deportation and the complete destruction of Earth communication infrastructure. They discussed casualty projections that ranged into the hundreds of millions. They discussed contingency plans for rendering portions of Earth's surface uninhabitable if resistance continued, and every word was transmitted across the galaxy in real time. The Galactic Council received the transmission and convened an emergency session within the hour 47. Species watched the footage of the Vraxin War Council planning what amounted to genocide against a pre-FTL civilization. The political fallout was immediate. The Vraxin Collective has violated every principle of the contact protocols, Elder Counselor Thane announced. They are hereby ordered to cease all military operations in the Sol system and withdraw their forces immediately. The Vraxin representative attempted to argue that the footage was fabricated, but technical analysis confirmed its authenticity. 3 species that had maintained trade relationships with the Vraxin immediately severed all contact. 2 others threatened military intervention if the withdrawal did not begin within 24 hours. But the JSOC-17 team was not finished while the galaxy reacted to the War Council footage. Another element of the operation was unfolding teams of Russian Spetsnaz and Chinese Snow Leopard commandos were simultaneously executing coordinated strikes against every major Vraxin supply depot in the Sol system. Attacks were timed to the second and used intelligence gathered over weeks of surveillance on Luna. A supply base that fed the entire Earth occupation force disappeared in a series of explosions that were visible from Earth's surface on Mars. The Vraxin Forward Operations Hub lost power when critical infrastructure was destroyed by operators who had infiltrated weeks earlier, posing as maintenance workers in the asteroid belt. 3 ammunition depots were sabotaged using techniques that made the damage look like industrial accidents rather than enemy action. The Vraxin supply chain collapsed in less than 6 hours without resupply. The occupation forces on Earth had perhaps 2 weeks of operational capabilities received the damage reports and the Galactic Council's withdrawal orders simultaneously. He stood on the bridge of dominant will and looked at the tactical displays showing his forces scattered across Earth and running low on supplies and facing an enemy that could strike anywhere and could not be predicted or stopped. Prepare for full withdrawal, he said quietly. His officers looked at him in shock. The first incident occurred at a Vraxin supply depot outside occupied Mumbai, where sensors showed nothing but empty warehouses and abandoned vehicles. The patrol that had been stationed there simply vanished. No distress calls and no weapons fire. And no trace of combat, just 12 Vraxin soldiers gone as if they had never existed. Commander Zephys received the report with irritation rather than concern. Equipment malfunction, he declared. The humidity in this region interferes with our sensors, and the patrol probably got lost in the urban ruins. But when a second patrol sent to investigate also disappeared, Zethys began paying attention. The next incident came at the Vraxin Forward Operating Base, established in what humans called the Mojave Desert. Base commander was reviewing supply manifests when his entire command staff disappeared from a secured room that had only one entrance and was under constant surveillance. The security footage showed them sitting at their stations one moment and then static for exactly 4 seconds, and then an empty room. Forensic analysis found nothing except a faint chemical signature that the Vraxin databases could not identify. This is impossible, the base commander transmitted to the flagship. Our sensors show no intrusions, and our security systems detected nothing, and yet 6 of my senior officers have vanished from a locked room across Earth. The pattern repeated. Ammunition depots on Luna exploded in carefully timed sequences that suggested precise knowledge of Vraxin. Supply chains communication relays on Mars went offline in ways that looked like equipment failure, but happened too frequently to be coincidence. Patrols in occupied cities started finding their own soldiers dead in alleyways with no indication of how they got there or what killed them. They Vraxin wore armor that could withstand direct hits from human conventional weapons, but somehow these soldiers died from injuries that looked like their armor had been removed and then put back on after Deathithis called an emergency meeting with his senior commanders. "We are facing a new threat," he announced. "Analysis suggests the humans have deployed asymmetric warfare units that are using stealth and sabotage to disrupt our operations. Our sensors should detect any approach." The security chief argued, "We can see through walls and detect heartbeats from 50 meters and identify weapon signatures and track heat signatures. Then explain how we have lost over 300 soldiers in the past week with 0 enemy sightings." Zethus demanded. No one had an answer. What the Vraxin did not understand was that they were facing warriors who had spent decades learning to defeat exactly the kind of technology the aliens relied upon in the waters off California. SEL team surfaced 3 kilometers from the Vraxin coastal installation and checked their equipment. One final time, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison reviewed the mission brief on his waterproof tablet. Vraxin had established a supply hub using human port facilities, and their sensors were configured to detect threats from land and air, but not from the ocean because their homeworld had no large bodies of water, and they had never developed doctrine for amphibious threats. "We're brothers off at the 10-meter mark," Morrison whispered to his team. "We go under on oxygen reserves from there and no thermal signatures and no bubbles, and we stay in the thermal layer where their sensors can't differentiate us from marine life." The 8 SEALs submerged and moved through the dark water with practiced efficiency that came from hundreds of training dive. They had studied Vraxin's sensor capabilities for weeks and knew exactly where the blind spots were. Installation's underwater supports were unguarded because the Vraxin considered them inaccessible. The SEALs attached shaped charges with magnetic clamps and set timers synchronized to the microsecond. They were back in the water and swimming away before the Vraxin even knew they had been there. The charges detonated at dawn, and the entire facility collapsed into the Pacific and took 3 Vraxin ships and 500 tons of supplies with it across the continent. A Delta Force team was executing an even more audacious operation. They had been captured deliberately and processed through the Vraxin prisoner intake system on the occupied USS Ronald Reagan that the aliens had converted into a command ship. What the Vraxin did not know was that each prisoner was carrying components that individually looked like random personal items, but when combined formed functional weapons and communication devices. Sergeant First Class Maria Reyes had her weapon disguised as a belt buckle and boot heel, and the metal detector the Vraxin used could not differentiate between their components and normal clothing fasteners. Once inside the ship's detention area, the team assembled their gear and waited for the guard rotation they had memorized from 3 days of observation at 0200 hours. They moved. The Vraxin guards never had a chance to sound an alarm. The Delta operators moved through the ship using stolen access codes and reached the main server room, where they downloaded every piece of intelligence the Vraxin had collected on Earth. They were gone before the bodies were discovered, and 12 hours later, they transmitted everything they had stolen to Earth Defense Command in London. An SAS squadron was teaching the Vraxin about fighting in terrain the aliens had never imagined. The city's underground tunnels stretched for hundreds of kilometers in a network that predated modern sensors and the Vraxin scanners could not penetrate. The layers of concrete and metal, and Earth Sergeant Major William Hayes led his team through tunnels that had not been used since the Second World War and positioned charges beneath a Vraxin command post that their intelligence indicated was coordinating occupation forces across Europe. "The blast will be shaped upward," Hayes explained to his team. "Everything above collapses and everything horizontal stays intact. And we use the chaos to extract their communication equipment before reinforcements arrive." The charges detonated at precisely 1500 hours during The Vraxin shift changed when maximum personnel would be in the building. The structure collapsed into the tunnel system, and the SAS team moved through the rubble with gas masks and thermal imaging and extracted 6 Vraxin communication devices before vanishing back into the underground by the time Vraxin rescue teams arrived. The only evidence that anyone had been there was boot prints in the dust and a spray-painted message on a wall. Mind the gap. The Vraxin did not understand the reference, but their xenopsychology team reported it was probably a cultural taunt. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where humans had been fighting for centuries, a combined task force of American Green Berets and British SBS operators were running a different kind of operation. They were training local resistance fighters to turn captured Vraxin technology against the occupiers. Their energy weapons have a recharge cycle of 3 seconds. Captain Robert Chun explained through a translator to a group of Afghan fighters. You hit them with conventional fire to make them use their shields, and then you wait exactly 3 seconds and hit them with RPGs during the recharge, and their shields cannot stop both. The Afghan fighters absorbed this information with the same intensity they had applied to resisting every other occupying force in their history within a week. Vraxin patrols in the region were reporting ambush that used their own weapon recharge cycles against them. In Poland, GROM operators were demonstrating why Eastern European special forces had a particular reputation for creative violence. They had captured a Vraxin troop transport intact by using an electromagnetic pulse weapon built from stolen alien components and human engineering, and now they were using it to insert operators directly into Vraxin-controlled zones in Israel. Shaytet 13 commandos were conducting maritime raids that left the Vraxin questioning whether the ocean itself had turned hostile in Russia. Spetsnaz teams were using the vast wilderness as an ally against an enemy that relied too heavily on sensors and not enough on fieldcraft. Vraxin patrol in Siberia reported seeing nothing but empty forest right up until the moment when 20 Russian operators emerged from concealment positions they had held for 6 hours in below-freezing temperatures and eliminated the entire patrol in less than 30 seconds across Earth. The pattern was the same: conventional forces held territory and fought the open battles, but in the shadows and the spaces between, special operations forces were teaching the Vraxin that superior technology meant nothing when you could not find. Your Enemizethis reviewed the casualty reports with growing alarm in 2 weeks. Sabotage and ambush had killed more Vraxin soldiers than the first month of conventional warfare. His forces controlled the cities but could not move between them without losses. Supply lines were under constant attack. Communication was unreliable. Morale was collapsing as soldiers realized they could be killed at any moment by an enemy they could not see or predict. We need to adapt, his tactical officer said. These human special forces are using doctrine that bypasses our technological advantages. Then we will find them and eliminate them, Zethis said. How? The officer asked. They do not concentrate forces, and they do not hold territory, and they strike from unexpected angles and disappear before we can respond, and our sensors cannot track them because they have learned to defeat our detection methods. Zethis had no answer. That night, a Marsoc team infiltrated the flagship Dominant Will using a captured Vraxin shuttle and stole the commander's personal logs along with strategic planning documents. They left behind a note written in perfect Vraxin script. The Vraxin subjugation fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system with 200 warships arranged in a formation that had conquered 11 previous star systems without significant modification. Commander Zethis sat on the bridge of the flagship Dominant Will and watched the tactical displays populate with data about the primitive planet they had come to claim. Initial scans confirmed the Council's data. His tactical officer reported, no energy shields detected around the planet and no vessels. capable of faster-than-light travel, and their satellite network appears to be primarily communication and observation-based. Zethus felt satisfaction ripple through his combat glance, broadcast the standard subjugation terms. He ordered immediate surrender and integration into the collective with minimal casualties or total pacification through orbital bombardment. The communication officer transmitted the message across all frequencies humanity used for their crude electromagnetic broadcasts. The response came within 3 minutes. Unknown vessels. "This is Earth Defense Command," a human voice said through the translation matrix. "You have entered sovereign space without authorization, and you are ordered to withdraw immediately, or you will be fired upon." Zethus released the Vraxin equivalent of laughter. "They threaten us with primitive kinetic weapons," he said to his bridge crew. "Prepare to demonstrate our superiority and target their military installations with precision strikes and avoid population centers for now, as we will need workers once they accept reality." The fleet advanced toward Earth with textbook precision that had been refined over centuries of successful campaigns. What Zethus did not know was that humanity had detected the Vraxin fleet's approach 3 days earlier when they decelerated from FTL, and those 3 days had been enough for Earth's governments to activate contingency plans that had been developed over 2 decades. The first indication that something was wrong came when the Vraxin forward destroyers encountered a debris field that sensors had marked as inactive satellites. The debris activated thousands of what humans called kinetic kill vehicles, ignited solid fuel boosters, and accelerated to speeds that made them nearly impossible to track, and the Vraxin point defense systems managed to intercept 70% of them. 30% was enough. 3. Destroyers disappeared in blooms of superheated metal as tungsten rods traveling at orbital velocities punched through their hulls like paper. Evasive maneuvers, Zethus commanded. As alarms shrieked across the bridge, "Return fire." But there was nothing to return fire at because the kinetic weapons had no power signatures to track and came from trajectories that suggested they had been positioned weeks ago in anticipation of this exact approach. Vector the fleet adapted and shifted formation and advanced more cautiously. They reached low Earth orbit and began engaging what appeared to be conventional military targets, radar installations, missile silos, naval bases, and airfields. The humans responded with a coordinated strike that should have been impossible for a planet without unified common submarine-launched missiles erupted from oceans across the globe, and their trajectories were calculated with such precision that they converged on the Vraxin fleet from every angle simultaneously. Impossible, the tactical officer said. Their computational capacity should not allow this level of coordination. But humanity had spent 70 years developing networked warfare and artificial intelligence. Targeting systems, and every submarine commander had been drilling this exact scenario in simulators for months. The Vraxin energy shields absorbed most of the missile strikes, but the sheer volume forced the fleet to divert power from weapons to defense. That was when Earth's atmosphere came alive, with aircraft, not the primitive chemical jets the Vraxin expected, but stealth fighters that had been loitering in designated zones waiting for their moment. And they carried weapons that the Vraxin scanners had difficulty categorizing because they combined multiple attack vectors, kinetic penetrators, wrapped around electromagnetic pulse generators, and shielded with materials designed to absorb energy weapon impacts. A squadron of what humans called F-35s emerged from below radar coverage and launched missiles at Vraxin troop transports trying to establish landing zones. The transports' shields flickered under the combined assault, and 2 suffered catastrophic failures and spiraled into the ocean. Zethus watched his casualty reports climb and felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. These primitives fight with unexpected effectiveness. His second officer observed. They are using quantity over quality. Zethus replied. And we have sufficient forces to absorb these losses, and our ground troops will secure population centers, and once we control their infrastructure, their resistance will collapse. The invasion proceeded in Vraxen. Dropships descended on major cities across Earth. They encountered coordinated resistance that used every advantage the defenders possessed. Urban terrain that negated the Vraxen's numerical sensors. Improvised explosives placed with mathematical precision, and human soldiers who fought with a ferocity that surprised even seasoned Vraxen warriors in Beijing. Chinese forces lured a Vraxen battalion into a subway system and collapsed it using pre-positioned charges and buried 300 alien soldiers under concrete and steel in Washington, D.C. American Marines held the Pentagon for 16 hours against overwhelming force, and when they finally retreated through tunnels the Vraxen didn't know existed, they left behind booby traps that killed another 200 invaders in Moscow. Russian forces demonstrated their doctrine of defense in depth and drew the Vraxen into street-to-street fighting that consumed resources at rates the invasion planners had never anticipated. The pattern repeated across the globe. Humanity was losing in terms of territory, but they were making the Vraxen pay for every meter after 2 weeks of grinding combat. Zethus controlled orbit and had established occupation zones in 17 major cities, but his casualty reports showed numbers that should have been impossible against primitive opponents. 12 ships destroyed, 43 ships damaged, 17,000 ground troops killed, 23,000 wounded, and the humans showed no signs of surrendering. They fight like they have nothing to lose. The tactical officer observed during a strategy meeting, because they do not. The intelligence officer added, displaying intercepted communications. Their governments have activated what they call continuity of government protocols, and their military leadership has dispersed into hidden facilities, and they are treating this as an existential threat. Zethus reviewed the data and made a decision. If they want total war, we will give it to them, he said. Prepare orbital bombardment of secondary cities and demonstrate that continued resistance only brings destruction. The intelligence officer shifted uncomfortably. Commander, I must report something unusual in our intercepted communications, he said. The humans are activating military units we have not yet encountered, and they refer to them with designation codes that suggest specialized functions. Specialized how? Zethus demanded. The translations are unclear, but they use terms like Special Operations Forces and Tier 1 Assets and are exempt psychology. Analysis suggests these may be elite units held in reserve. Zethus dismissed this with a gesture. Elite troops are still just troops, he said. Our warriors wear armor that deflects their weapons, and our sensors can detect them through walls, and our numerical advantage is overwhelming. And even their best soldiers cannot change the strategic reality. The intelligence officer looked like he wanted to say more, but remained silent. What none of the Vraxen knew was that while conventional forces had been engaging the invasion, something else was happening in the shadows. Small teams of human operators had been moving into position. They carried equipment that seemed primitive by galactic standards, but had been selected specifically for fighting an enemy with superior sensors and energy weapons. They moved through terrain that the Vraxen scanners marked as impassable or empty. They studied their enemy with patience that came from training that broke ordinary humans and rebuilt them into something else in the waters off occupied Los Angeles. A team of Navy SEALs waited in the cold Pacific and breathed through rebreathers that produced no bubbles and waited for the right moment to strike at the Vraxen supply depot on the coasting. The mountains outside occupied Seoul, a combined task force of South Korean and American special operators mapped Vraxen patrol patterns with precision and prepared ambush using weapons that would leave no traceable signatures in the ruins of London. SAS operators moved through tube tunnels the Vraxen didn't know existed and positioned themselves beneath an enemy command post across Earth. Thousands of special operators from dozens of nations were doing what they had trained their entire careers to do, preparing to take the fight to an enemy that thought they were safe as Ethes stood on his bridge and looked at the tactical map showing Vraxin-controlled zones spreading across Earth's surface. Another week, and we will have broken their organized resistance. He predicted. His intelligence officer said nothing but privately reviewed the intercepted communications that kept mentioning those specialized units. The last message he had decoded was simple, but somehow ominous. Green light for all SOF assets. It had said, "Rules of engagement." There are no rules. The intelligence officer did not understand what that meant in 72 hours. The emergency lights bathed the grand chamber in crimson as delegates from 47 star systems materialized at their stations through quantum relays and gravity wells. Their forms ranging from silicon-based crystalline beings to methane-breathing colonies that existed as unified consciousness across multiple bodies. Elder Counselor Thane of the Morpheus Alignment called the session to order with a pulse of gravitational force that rippled through the chamber and brought immediate silence to the assembled representatives. We gathered today to address the Vraxin Collective's proposal, Thane announced, his translated words appearing simultaneously in every delegate's primary sensory input, whether that was sound, light, chemical markers, or electromagnetic pulses. A towering Vraxin commander rose from his delegation's platform, his exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's bioluminescent ceiling that stretched 300 meters overhead and displayed real-time stellar maps of known space. "The proposal is simple," Commander Zethis declared, his multiple vocal cords creating harmonics that the translation matrix rendered into confident, almost arrogant tones. "Our scans show that Sol 3, the world these primitives call Earth, possesses resources our collective requires, and the indigenous population has not yet achieved faster-than-light capability, which under Protocol 7 grants us salvage rights." Wave of uncomfortable shifting moved through several delegations, as others maintained carefully neutral silence. Thane's form pulsed with what the translation matrix interpreted as deep concern. "The Vraxin Collective is, of course, technically correct about Protocol 7, Thane said slowly, each word carefully measured. "However, this council placed Sol 3 under indefinite quarantine 62 cycles ago for reasons that extend far beyond typical non-interference protocols, superstition, and cowardice." Zethis shot back, spreading his 4 primary arms in a gesture of dismissal. "I have reviewed the surveillance data, and yes, the humans wage war among themselves with impressive frequency, but they are planet-bound. They lack energy shielding, their vessels cannot break light speed, and their weapons are crude chemical reactions and simple kinetic force." The counselor for the Hive Communes, a collective intelligence spanning 17 bodies that spoke in perfect unison, interjected with a buzz that carried undertones of warning. "Commander Zethis, your assessment reveals dangerous gaps in understanding," the Hive said. "The quarantine was not established because humanity possesses advanced technology, but precisely because they have achieved devastating effectiveness without it." From another platform, Ambassador Krull of the Peaceful Synthesis added her own caution, a gaseous form swirling with colors that indicated anxiety. "In our 30,000 years of galactic record-keeping, we have never encountered a species that has simultaneously maintained over 200 distinct nation-states while also developing weapons capable of rendering their entire planet uninhabitable," Krull said. "Most species unify before they reach atomic fission, or they destroy themselves in the attempt. But humans have somehow maintained both division and restraint, while continuously refining their capacity for organized violence." Zethis released a sound the translation matrix rendered as derisive laughter. "You fear primitives because they fight amongst themselves?" he said. "The Vraxin Collective has conquered 12 star systems and our military has never known defeat, and I am expected to fear a species that cannot even leave their own solar system without chemical rockets." Thane gestured, and the chamber's display system activated, projecting three-dimensional historical footage gathered by long-range observation drones that had been monitoring Earth for decades. The first image showed human forces during what their records called the Second World War. Observe their industrial capacity. Thane narrated as the footage displayed factories producing tanks, aircraft, and ships at rates that made several delegates physically recoil in shock. In a single 4-year period, one human nation produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, 86,000 tanks, and constructed 2 atomic weapons from theoretical physics to deployment in under 4 years, while simultaneously fighting wars on multiple continents. The display shifted to show carrier strike groups, submarines lurking in ocean depths, formations of armored divisions moving with mechanical precision, and nuclear weapons testing. "This is their conventional military capability," Thane continued. "They have developed combined arms warfare to a level of sophistication we have never observed in a pre-FTL species, and they maintain standing militaries numbering in the millions with reserve forces that can mobilize entire populations within days." The Vraxin delegation remained unmoved, but Zephyr's secondary arms twitched in a way that suggested he was at least paying closer attention. The footage changed again, this time showing more recent surveillance. Stealth aircraft that could evade most standard detection, submarines that could remain underwater for months, coordinated drone swarms numbering in the thousands, and kinetic bombardment simulations. They have weaponized mathematics, the Hive Kanyans observed with something approaching awe. They calculate trajectories with such precision that simple mass becomes devastation, and they have created artificial intelligence systems for targeting that outperform most organic species combat decision-making. Ambassador Krell's colors shifted to deep purple. "What troubles us most is their tactical creativity," she said. "Every major conflict they wage introduces new doctrines, and they study warfare the way most species study medicine or engineering and their military academies have produced thousands of years' worth of strategic theory." Zethus finally showed a hint of uncertainty. "Even if all of this is accurate, numbers and creativity cannot overcome superior technology," he argued. "Our energy weapons can level their cities from orbit, and our shields can deflect their primitive projectiles, and our troops wear armor that their conventional weapons cannot penetrate." Thane's form pulsed with what might have been sadness. "That is precisely what the Celtic Empire believed 70 cycles ago," he said quietly. "They sent a small scouting force to probe Earth's defenses without authorization, and the humans detected them and shot down 3 vessels using modified chemical rockets before the Celtics retreated. And the Empire was so humiliated they concealed the incident from this council for 2 decades. The chamber erupted in shocked responses, as this information had never been officially disclosed. Furthermore, Thane continued once order was restored, "Our xenopsychology teams have extensively studied human culture and warfare, and their capacity for sustained violence is matched only by their capacity for sacrifice and loyalty, and these traits combined with their tool-using adaptability and endurance capabilities make them uniquely dangerous." The display showed footage of human soldiers in every environment: Arctic wastes, desert heat, jungle humidity, urban ruins, underwater, and even early attempts at zero-gravity combat training. "They are persistence hunters by evolution," the Hive noted. "On Earth, humans are not the fastest or strongest predators, but they can outlast anything, and they can survive in nearly any environment, and they can coordinate in groups while maintaining individual initiative. Zephyr stood silent for a long moment, processing the data, weighing his collective's ambitions against the Council's warnings. Finally, he spoke with the confidence of a commander who had never lost. The Vraxen Collective appreciates the Council's concern, but we did not build an empire across 12 systems by cowering from pre-FTL primitives, he declared. We will proceed with subjugation operations, and when we present Earth's surrender to this Council in 60 cycles, perhaps the quarantine protocols will be revised to reflect reality rather than paranoia. The vote was called, and despite strong opposition from several delegations, Protocol 7's Salvage Rights Clause gave the Vraxen Collective legal authority to proceed as the session concluded and delegates began departing. Thane shared a private communication channel with Ambassador Krell. They have no idea what they are about to unleash, Krell said, her colors shifting to morning shades. No, Thane agreed. They fear human militaries because they can see the ships and weapons and soldiers, but they do not understand that humanity's true strength lies not in their conventional forces, but in what they are willing to become when survival demands it. Should we warn them more explicitly? Krell asked. Would they listen? Thane replied both knew the answering 60 cycles. The Galactic Council would reconvene, and the Vraxen Collective would learn what the Council had tried to protect them from understanding. They would learn that humanity's conventional military was just the beginning. They would learn that when humans decided something needed to be done, they created individuals who could do the impossible. They would learn about the warriors who operated in shadows and silence, but by then, it would be far too late.